Hello students, let us resume our discussion on the passage to India by Walt Whitman. In my previous lecture, I have continued or I have told you something about the importance of the past that Walt Whitman has propagated in the first section of this particular poem. Up to the first section, that is the first stanza, we didn't find anything, any particular line where the term India was being incorporated. Now, in the beginning of the second stanza, we will find that this very term is being used here. Let us read this particular section. It begins with this particular fashion. Passage, O soul, to India. So ultimately, here the term passage to India, that means let me come nearer to India. Let me come psychologically, spiritually to India. Why India? I have discussed in my previous lectures. Now here he says passage O soul to India. That means India is the place where we can get the ultimate peace. India is the place. Obviously, it is not simply a geographical place. Rather, you will find it is actually indicating towards a particular place of heritage. It is the world heritage. It is a particular concept. It is a particular, say, psychological space where you can get your salvation or spiritual, say, opening or spiritual peace, obviously. It says, passage O soul to India, eclaircies the myths, Asiatic and primitive fables. This particular term, you see, it is not a kind of an English term. It's a French term that actually means explain. So explain the myths, Asiatic. That means I want to know something about the Asiatic myths. I want to know about the primitive fables. Why? Because I know that everything lies there. If you go with the fables, the primitive fables, if you read the Asiatic myths or know the Asiatic myths, then we will find that the burden of or the mystery of our creation will be enlightened, as it has been pointed by William Wordsworth also in Tintern Abbey. So passage of soul to India eclaircies the myths, Asiatic, the primitive fables. Not you alone, proud truths of the world, nor you alone, you facts of modern science. So here you will find, as I mentioned, that the beginning of this particular poem was with the, to some extent, the celebration of the present scenario, the celebration of the, say, present scientific advancements. And here he, that is the poet or the speaker of this particular poem, he is incorporating the same ideology. He says, not you alone. Mark the term alone. That is, it is also important, obviously, the present scenario. And that's why it has been mentioned in the first section. But here he says, not you alone, proud truths of the world. So the proud truths of the world, these are happening to be the present. Again he says, nor you alone, you facts of modern science. Again the modern science, the facts of modern science are associated with the present. But that means apart from all these, apart from the present scenario, I want to know about the myths and fables of old, Asia's, Africa's fables. So here it is not old, actually it's old. So but myths and fables of old, Asia's and Africa's fables. So ultimately you will find that now whenever we will find that these are associating, okay, the ideologies, the knowledges, or maybe the informations about Asia, about Africa, okay, all these are associated with the primitive religions. All these are associated with the pagan cults. All these sections are considered to be the storehouse of memories, cultural heritages. Everywhere you will find there is something that is completely missing in the typical Western worlds, quote unquote, progressive Western worlds. So that's why the myths and fables of the old Asia's, Africa's fables, these are actually indicating towards the stories and myths and legends and fables that are found in abundance in these places like Asia and Africa. And Whitman could identify that these are very significant, these are very important to understand the present scenario, to read the present scenario properly. Therefore, he writes, "Not you alone, proud truths of the world, nor you alone, you facts of modern science, but myths and fables of the old Asia's and Africa's fables, the far-darting beams of the spirit, the unloosened dreams." So the far-darting, that means far moving, you see, dirt, as you can see. The far-darting beams of the spirits, because when you think of about Africa, when you think about Asia, when you go with the fables, when you go with, you see, Ramayana and Mahabharata, and also the holy scriptures of India, you will find that there are ample references, there are ample provisions where we can get the ancient sages with their spiritual power. Okay, and that particular power is completely missing in the present scenario. There was the spirit, there was the spiritual dreams, there are the spiritual power that are present in them. So, myths and fables of old Asia's, Africa's fables, the far-darting beams of the spirit, the unloosed or loosened dreams, the deep-diving Bibles and legends. So it is not Bible, rather Bibles. Okay, these are actually referring to the scriptural sources, and legends are all there. The daring plots of the poets, the elder religions, you see. If you think of the Hinduism, ultimately you will find these were there from the primitive times, you see. These are happening to be present. If you think of, say, Africa, if you think about the Igbo culture, if you think about the Yoruba culture, if you think of Asia, if you think about Hinduism, ultimately you will find that these are being associated with the primitive times. These are related with the primitive cultures. Okay? In Ramayana and Mahabharata, you can find there are ample references of people who are practicing in different ways. So the holy scriptures, the Bibles, you see, the legends, ultimately you can find these are the storehouses from where you can accumulate your own stories. So these are the daring plots of the poets. There you can find the references of elder religions. It is actually indicating that if you think in terms of Christianity, these are younger. Okay? And if you think about the primitive culture, primitive religion, these have to be treated as elder religion. Okay? So that's why it says, the deep diving Bibles and legends, the daring plots of the poets, the elder religions, O you temples, fairer than lilies, poured over by the rising sun. So I don't know whether these are indicating towards the temples that have been created by white marbles. These are fairer than lilies. And you can find these are poured over by the rising sun. That means the poet is to some extent describing the beauties that are present in these places. The temples that are fairer than lilies, the white temples, as you can see, okay, and poured over by the rising sun. It might be possible that there is a particular implication to Taj Mahal. And poured over by the rising sun, that means when the sun rises, its light actually falls over this particular temple. And the illustrious forms are present, you see. The dazzle, the luster that is present within them. All these things have been taken care of here in this particular poem. He says, O you temples, fairer than lilies, poured over by the rising sun. O you fables, spurning the known, eluding the hold, you see. Spurning means refusing the known. Eluding means avoiding. So, O you fables, that is refusing the known, that are eluding the hold of the known, mounting to heaven. So something spiritual again. The known has to be refused. The hold of the known has to be avoided. So ultimately, the fables are taking us towards the unknown places. The fables are leading us towards the particular thoughts and ideas that are completely being unknown by the West. So these are the treasure houses. These are implicating towards the something unknown, you see. So that's why it is being continued here. O you fables, spurning the known, eluding the hold of the known, mounting to heaven, you lofty and dazzling towers, pinnacled, red as roses, burnished with gold. So these are, various kinds of descriptions. The descriptive notions have been incorporated here. These are somehow missing from the Western form of writing. And you can find in the fables, in the myths, there are ample references of the kings. There are ample references of say, a temple made out of gold. So these were there. And as we are Indians, we know that they were here. Probably the parts are completely missing here due to some exploitations are there. But ultimately, we can find that in this particular poem, Walt Whitman is continuously referring to these references. You lofty, dazzling towers, pinnacled as if it is reaching the sky, red as roses, okay, burnished with gold. Towers of fables immortal, fashioned from mortal dreams. So somehow, these are obviously Whitman is making resources or taking resources from these particular informations. But ultimately, you will find that he says that these are the towers of fables. So generally, it is not that the Western poet is trying to accept this. Rather, these are constituted. He is trying to propagate his own ideologies. That these are part of fables. That means are stories. These are not present, you see. It might be associated with mortal dreams, as you can see. So these are towers of fables, immortal, fashioned from mortal dreams. So we can dream of, but we cannot see these are present. Somehow, when Whitman is writing this particular poem, I don't know whether he has the foreknowledge. You know that at that time, there was no particular possibility of reaching internet. Okay, so the telecommunications were not such powerful at the time. So ultimately, what I'm trying to suggest, that the stories came, you see, okay, through multiple resources, through multiple references. Probably these authors have the foreknowledge or they have the knowledge about the stories. But as they didn't experience first-handedly, so ultimately these were constituted by them as the parts of fables, as parts of myths, as parts of dreams, as you can see. So he says that towers of fables, immortal fashioned from mortal dreams. You too, I welcome, and fully the same as the rest. You too, with joy I sing. That means it is not simply the present that is at the fundamental focus of my poem. Rather, if it is being associated with the past, if it is being associated with the primitive religions, if it is being associated with the fables of Asia and Africa, you too I welcome, okay, in my poem, and fully as the same as rest. That means just like the Suez Canal, just like the transatlantic cables, or maybe the intercontinental, as you can see, the movements or locomotives. So ultimately here he says that you too I welcome, and fully as same as the rest, you too with joy I sing in my poem, or in this particular verse that has been taken care of here. So ultimately here he writes that passage to India. Again, lo, soul, seest thou not God's purpose from the first? So it continues in the same fashion. So ultimately, when the transatlantic cable has been incorporated, when the Suez Canal is there, do you not find that here is God's divine design is in work? Lo, soul, see, lo means see. Seest thou not God's purpose from the first? So here lies God's purpose. God is trying so that these places have to be connected. So that's why he says, passage to India. Lo soul, seest thou not God's purpose from the first? The earth to be spanned, connected by network, the races, neighbors, to marry, means interconnected, and be given in marriage. Marriage is here symbolically being used, as you see, because marriage, it continues to be thought as a connector, as you can see. And here, as through Suez Canal or maybe the transatlantic cables, and so everywhere you will find that the two places have been connected. That's where the term marriage has been used here. So the earth to be spanned, connected by network, the races, neighbors, to marry and to given in marriage, the oceans to be crossed, the distant brought near, the lands to be welded together. So everything has been mentioned here. This is a much easier section. And here you will find that ultimately Whitman is trying to propagate, he's trying to mean that, in spite of all these scientific advancement, technical advancements, we must say, we must not negate that there is the divine design that is working behind us. Without his power, nothing can be procured. So ultimately, we must say, we must think that everything has been located or interlocated, okay, or welded or maybe married, okay, with the help of the God's design. That means it has God that has chosen for us, you see, that ultimately we have been chosen by him, and that's why these have been created. So that's why he says, Lo soul, seest thou not God's purpose from the past? The art to be spanned, connected by network, the races, neighbors to marry and to give in marriage, the oceans to be crossed, the distant brought near, the lands to be welded together. A worship new, I think. So it is the time for worshipping them. You captains, you voyagers, you explorers, yours. You engineers, you architects, mechanists, yours. You, not for trade or transportation only, but in God's name and for thy sake, O soul. So ultimately, I have to sing this particular verse, I have to commemorate them, I have to celebrate them. Celebrate whom? The captains, voyagers, explorers, engineers, architects, mechanics, everybody. So not for trade or transportation only, but in God's name. That means you are the God's messengers. Through you, God is actually working. It was God's divine design and it has been done through you. So you are the messengers. With the help of you, all these things have been created. All these things have been interconnected. And through you, God's divine design is working. So just for, in God's name, I am celebrating, or in God's name, I'm worshipping you in the form of my song, in the form of my poetry, and also for thy sake, O soul. That means the soul that is actually thinking, thinking part, thinking soul. For you, I must sing this particular poem. So this will be continuing in our next lectures. Stay attached. Thank you.